You have a good board, that's for sure, with David Brandon as the chairman of the Renaissance Board. What other names would we know? Other industries, other people that are on board that are understanding just how important this is?
Well, we really have, Paul, the who's who of business leadership, and Bill Ford, for example, is our executive committee chairperson. Jim Nicholson, somebody very active in the region, is our executive committee vice chairperson. We have, as I said, all the university presidents, from Mary Sue Coleman at University of Michigan to Luann Simon at Michigan State. We have virtually every director or president of any auto supplier here in the region. All the bank presidents are on it. So we have just a terrific lineup. People like Peter Carmanos to Stephen Strom from Handelman. So a very diverse group of individuals.
You know, in a word, gentlemen, it's a bunch of CEOs who have already done what many of us can't understand why the state has not yet done. I mean, I hate to be blunt, but the fact is, those CEOs have had substantial changes, have had to go through substantial changes and reductions to get their businesses in order, and frankly, the state of Michigan has to get the Michigan government cost structure reduced. It has to become lower, and it's going to be painful, just like it's been painful for those CEOs. And I'm certain that they can offer the governor on down insight on how it's not pretty, but it has to be done, and once it is done, there can be some great success.
Well, that's exactly right, Paul W. And you know, I'll give you one specific example that we've suggested to the state, and that is how to improve the way they make their financial projections. If you were to ask any business person these days, David could talk about this most from a banking perspective, they are looking at their revenues and expenses daily. They are looking at the market conditions daily. The way our state government does financial projections is they meet a couple times a year. It's the staff from the legislature and the executive branch, certainly good, knowledgeable people, but they don't do it often enough. They don't get enough outside input, economic experts at the table to give them different perspectives on how the market works, and they don't do it long enough term. Even Brooks Patterson, for example, is out projecting a couple of years ahead of time. State government goes year to year with their projections. These are examples of, if you were to implement a reform like that, think of how much more effective state government could manage its resources. And it's an expertise that we, the private sector, could help them bring to the table.
David Boyle?
Yeah, it would be painful, Paul, and it will be painful for government to cut back, but it has to happen. Michigan has to become a state that is friendly to business, a place where people want to do business, they want to come here. And the only way you're going to do that is with reforms at the state level that foster that sort of behavior, that sort of desire for people to live and want to work here. And from a business perspective, just at National City alone, I every week sit down and look at my revenue projections for the next week, month, year, and 3 years. Every week I look at this, and I know what my expenditures are going to be, and I know where I need to say, yes, we can do this, or no, we can't do this. And we try in the business world to make intelligent investments that are good for the long-term viability of our businesses. The state government here today does it kind of backwards. And I think if there were some focus put on a Blue Ribbon Commission or some sort of group that could sit down and work through the state with this, that would go a long way to solving some of Michigan's challenges.
You know, and Paul W., a way to kind of put this in context is that one of the CEOs on our board went down to make a presentation outside the state. This was when all the hullabaloo was going on about the sales tax on services. And you might say at first, well, geez, what David and I are talking about really have to do with pure economic development? Well, when he went down and gave that talk, all the talk was about what are you guys doing up there in Michigan with trying to put a service tax into effect. That whole episode really undid, in many respects, all the good work that the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and Jim Eppolito and others are trying to do to really move this state forward. So when we talk about business climate reform, that may be really it sets the stage. It may be the most important thing to enable groups like ours to get our job done.
Well, and now with Detroit Renaissance moving into advocacy mode and becoming more aggressive in shaping Michigan's economic future, these principles represent a new specific agenda for the organization. Now you're going to start holding these legislators, not just the governor, but all of them in Lansing, accountable. So what specifically are you asking the legislators and the governor to do, and what are you asking businesses to do?
Well, just a couple real, I think, key points that summarize it. First of all is let's not spend money that we don't have. We shouldn't be really adding a lot of new programs right now when the revenues aren't there to support it. Second, we need to get a better handle on how we project our money, as we talked about before. Third is that we need to look at very specific spending reforms. Things like, for example, why is it that our Medicaid expenses are so much higher than other states? Why are our correction spending so much higher than other states? Shouldn't we have our benefits for school district and state employees more in line with that of the private sector? These are examples of how we can reform government, really not cut programs, and yet get into a much more financially sustainable structure. The other is that I think our board feels like if we are going to spend new money, we ought to do it in very targeted ways that have the greatest impact for the long-term benefit of the state. David mentioned education. Higher education in particular has been shown as being one of the most important determinants of the state's economic future, yet that's not something we're investing in. We're putting our money in other places like benefit programs that really aren't getting us where we need to be. So those are the kind of things that would make the biggest difference, and we've outlined more specific recommendations than that that are on our website.
You know, some of the grassroots things that need to happen, Paul, are we have to find a way to keep people in Michigan. The markets aren't going to grow whether you own a hair salon or whether you own one of the auto suppliers. You need people to work in these places, and as we lose people out of the state of Michigan, and they're leaving in droves, we're not going to be able to grow. So I think you have to find a way. I think we have to find a way to work with the legislatures to figure out the balance between the revenue needs and the spending. So just like you would do in your household, you shouldn't spend more than the balance that's in your checking account. And you look out and see where your next 3 or 4 months are going to be. You ought to have a safety fund. You ought to have some money in reserves, and we just don't have that sort of discipline. It doesn't appear to me, at least at the state level.
We haven't.
And so we need to figure out a way to work with the legislature and work with the governor and so forth to put these principles in place so that 10 years from now, if we're sitting here having a conversation, we're not having the same conversation.
And we've had a tendency to do that, Douglas. You know that as well as anybody. We talk about an issue, we talk about a problem, and we say, let's go get it. And then the next year we're together and we talk about that same issue. We talk about how we're going to fix it, and we say, let's go get it. And then we go back and we do the same thing over and over again. It's led people to think that some of these plans, some of these ideas are fly-by-night, may not be the best way of putting it, but kind of a here we go again sort of thing that will lose its momentum and steam once we're away from the microphones and the cameras. How do we make sure that this will be different and this won't happen this way?
Well, one technique that we use at Renaissance that all of our companies use is really to do a regular scorecard or report card on our progress. We're doing it with our own work plan that we report back to our board every other month on. We are doing it on the Road to Renaissance Economic Development Strategy, where we are literally putting out quarterly to the media red, yellow, green stoplight report to let everyone know how much progress we are or are not making. And I think it may come to that with these structural reforms, that we need to give it visibility and transparency to the general public. And if we can keep this issue in the light, my guess is that the elected leaders will make some progress. But if we don't, if we just go back in our hole, if you will, then this too will just pass.
And it's going to take leadership, Paul. It really is going to take leadership. It's going to take ownership by Renaissance of stepping up and holding people accountable for the outcomes. And much like we do, the very same way we do it in our business worlds, we need to start holding people accountable. And that's what excites me about being part of Detroit Renaissance.